I mean, that means even if you killed someone, you know, the therapist is not there to judge. The therapist is there to help.
How would you describe the type of therapy you do to someone who doesn't know much about therapy?
Interesting question. My approach is humanistic, and that means the person is the one who takes the lead. The person knows what's best for them. They already know it, they can feel it, they just can't access it for many reasons. And my job is to guide them through a process of self-discovery, which is different from when I first trained in CBT. I will be oversimplifying this, and that's possibly not fair, because CBT is really good in some aspects.
What CBT for someone who doesn't know?
Cognitive-Behavioural Therapy, which is the idea that you can change your behaviour, you can change your thoughts, and that changes how you feel. So, for example, desensitization is a common CBT technique for any sort of fear. It would say if you have social anxiety, go and speak in public many times until you become desensitized and you will no longer fear it.
And does that work?
It doesn't always work because it isn't that simple. I don't want to oversimplify, but the rationale behind this is if you do things anyway, and if you're able to change how you think, then you will change how you feel and you will feel better. But there is a universe behind this statement. And following, there is a little bit of, it looks simpler than it is. And I think there is a tendency for people adopting this technique to go for the simplified version. And then when it doesn't work, they think that there's something wrong with them. Because it's kind of, oh, I've given you this homework and you didn't do it, so it's your fault. I'm oversimplifying, but
the therapist thinks that, the patient isn't doing the right thing.
It's like the therapist has a green card to arrive at that conclusion, and the client has a green card to arrive at that conclusion. It isn't encouraged, but it's not discouraged. And it can be quite harmful, because where do you go from there as a client? So you go and you see someone for whatever they recommend, 6, 10, 20 sessions, and the therapist has told you, they have told you what you need to do, and you will try your best, or you won't even try, because there are reasons for that. There are reasons why you didn't speak in public in the first place. And that might be other factors around the fact that you don't speak in public. It can just be too painful for you to even try. And if you're not able to try, if you're not able to do what you're told you should be doing, then you will feel like a failure. And you feel like you don't fit, that the world knows best, that there are people out there who know how to think, and because they think well, they feel good, and it's all fine. And because I can't achieve that level of thinking that makes me feel good, I am a failure. There's something wrong with me. So that can lead someone to feel worse than they did if they didn't even try. And therefore, you might not try.
I guess that could apply to the whole movement of like the think positively movement, or when people are told like just change your thoughts, just make your thoughts positive. And if someone's depressed, it's like, how? Like if you're just thoughts are like constant, you know, negativity or even harmful thoughts, it's not like you want those thoughts to appear, they just are. So to just be like, think positively,
yeah,
is not helpful.
It's not helpful, and I think it can be quite damaging as well. It is quite a dangerous thing to tell someone that they just feel how they feel because they don't know how to think or they haven't tried hard enough. And that position also puts a lot of authority on the therapist, you know. Oh, yeah, well, I already told you how you should have done that. And the therapists themselves can feel a bit helpless, you know. Oh, but I've given you the ABC form, which is affect, behavior, cognition. We know where that comes from. We know what the result is, but the person still hasn't changed and it hasn't helped them. Therefore, I am a failure. So there is a lot of pressure to do things right and to adapt, in a sense, you know. And I was in that bandwagon to CBT is very charming. You know, when I did the course, I was charmed because it does help you a lot. It does help you with anxiety. It does help somewhat with depression and other things. And once you get the basic idea and you realize that there is some sort of mechanics behind how you feel and think and behave, and that you can change them, and that sometimes is easier than it seems, that is powerful. And it did help. And I've learned Cognitive-Behavioural Hypnotherapy. And hypnosis is a very powerful tool to help us focus on different things. So we feel generally we have something that someone calls, I can't remember the name, we can put it on the notes later, but they call it tunnel vision. So we have tunnel vision most of the time, and we just see that thing that we see and nothing else. And hypnosis helps us broaden that tunnel vision and adopt a new perspective by having someone there guiding as well. Having someone there with you is very powerful in general.
So what's hypnosis for someone who doesn't know what that is?
Hypnosis is inducing a state of relaxed, focused attention. So the instructions will normally be something quite repetitive. There will be a lot of pacing and then leading. There will be something soothing, some instructions to allow your body to relax and feel more comfortable. And, you know, we follow instructions. It's a natural thing. So it's really easy to become hypnotized, even if it's not by somebody. You can be hypnotized by an advert. You can be hypnotized by someone talking to you, or by something that you just pay a lot of attention to. It's just a state of focused attention.
It's like watching a film. You're like so absorbed by what's going on.
If you are, yes. It's possible to watch a film and not be. But yes, if you really are hooked in the story, and you know, sometimes you can cry with the film, right? Well, that's hypnosis, basically, yes. So we do that in a controlled way and get you to tell you a story that will be healing for you. And CBT with hypnosis will allow you to, for example, desensitize in your imagination. So imagine that you're going on public speaking, imagine what people are going to look like, imagine how you feel, and then change how you feel about it during hypnosis. And it is powerful. For me, the biggest takeaway from CBT was the idea of what's the worst that can happen. Because we have those ideas that things will be horrendous and it will be terrible and the world will end. And there are many reasons why you feel that. It's a very emotional response. So CBT will take you there. Okay, what's the worst that can happen? I will make a mistake. And then what? And then I will feel ashamed. Okay, so if someone else was there and they made a mistake, how would you feel about them? Would you mock them? Would you judge them? No. So why would other people do that to you? So, it does open up new possibilities of thought, looking for those cognitive biases, those errors of thinking can be helpful, because at least helps you see that just because you think a thought, it isn't true. We tend to get hooked in our thoughts and believe they're true and not question them. Mm-hmm. So hypno-CBT is good for allowing you to be relaxed and focused with someone there with you. And then you can challenge those thoughts because it feels safe. Okay, well, I can safely go there where it hurts. And then I realize it's not that bad. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I can, go and speak in public and I'm not going to be mocked and judged. Maybe.
That kind of sounds like the performance visualization that athletes do.
Yeah, that's purely CBT. I mean, yeah, it's...
I'm thinking of Michael Phelps when I think he won a gold medal in something and his goggles had come off in the race, but he rehearsed, through visualizations, every possible thing that could go wrong, including his goggles coming off. So then when it happened, he was prepared for it.
Oh, that's a good example. Yeah, so that's CBT will do that. Hypno-CBT will help you with that. Fear of flying, fear of pets, But then if you're coming into a hypnotherapy session saying, I'm here because I'm scared of cats, you already know that cats are not dangerous, because otherwise you wouldn't do that. So you're kind of doing more of what's working in a sense. So, okay, you're here, let me facilitate that process for you. And yes, to some extent, and I still use CBT techniques very often when it's appropriate, but it isn't just a one thing, it's not a panacea. It isn't just because neuroscientists and clinical psychologists manage to get some measure behind the outcomes. Doesn't mean that this is the only way, the only thing that works. In fact, any talking therapy is better than non-talking therapy, regardless of the style, approach, therapist. And the main factor in therapy is the relationship between the therapist and the client. In other words, you have to like your therapist. You have to get on. Otherwise, it won't work.
And trust them, right?
Yeah, trust is a big thing.
Because I know people who have said they go to therapy and they lie to their therapist.
Oh, that's normal. Yeah. But that is a big thing. It wasn't safe enough. They didn't feel safe enough. And that's a good point, because now we go back straight onto the humanistic approach. The humanistic approach operates under the concept of unconditional positive regard. There is nothing you would have ever done that a therapist who is working under what we call UPR will judge you for. I mean, that means even if you killed someone, the therapist is not there to judge. The therapist is there to help. And that's it. And we are obliged by law and possibly by your own moral standards to talk to the authorities if someone says they are about to kill someone or do harm or commit a serious crime.
Or to themselves, right?
Yes. But if they have already done it, if it's in the past, then that's just history. Then we just look at, okay, how can we move on from there?
So it's kind of like being a priest.
Yes, that's right. Yes. In that sense, yes. So you would not judge anybody, because that would defeat the whole point. We believe as humanists that everyone has and we steer clear from good and bad. But everyone has a core self that strives for self-actualization. He wants to grow. He wants to contribute. He wants to build. He wants to be part of. And that gets clouded by things that happen in the world, such as violence, war, abuse. Our environment is hostile. The world is dangerous. And having appreciating that is important. We had to survive, and we had to do whatever it took to survive, and in some cases that took killing somebody, or whatever you had to do to survive. And we bring trauma down the line. And there was a funny thing, because I was getting really into the concept of trauma and legacy trauma, which is where you get down the family line. And I started watching one of those Viking Netflix series. I watched Vikings Valhalla, and I also watched The Last Kingdom, because I just really like sort of history drama. And it shows you what it was like in Britain 1,000 years ago. It was pretty rough. So it makes a lot of sense that we still carry a lot of trauma, because the world has been brutal, It's war for territory, wars for survival, who you are, what tribe you're in, what defines your identity, what defines how many resources you have access to, what defines whether people accept you or not. And those are big things, and they're coming down the ages, and we want to get better, but we are not really, because a lot of it is so deeply ingrained that it's just really difficult, and also sometimes often inaccessible, because our minds lie to us, and we have tunnel vision and minds that make us feel good about ourselves, if the mind can do, even if it's dysfunctional. There's always positive intent, which is another humanistic feature, that there is positive intent behind everything you do. Everything.
Huh. And does that kind of link to, like, if you have like suicidal parts, yes, it's trying to help you because it thinks that's how to relieve pain?
That's right. So if you have a part, there are many ways that can happen, but one way is that you have a part that really wants to die. And I've just read a Terry Pratchett book called Thief of Time. And his books are brilliant, and I'm reading kind of in chronological order, and they're getting better. And in this one of the characters is not really human. They were a kind of demon who possessed a human body and became very human. But at the end of the book, they said, I just want one favor from you. And this character was talking to the granddaughter of death. And they said, I would like to die. And the character's like, are you sure? And she said, yes, I betrayed my own kind. I don't want to be the demon anymore, but I'm also not human anymore. I'm not human. I never will be fully human. So I would just like to start again. So death arranged for her to dive into a swimming pool of chocolate. So, he approached that in the way he does, which is by adding a ton of absurdity. But the reality was, sometimes you have a part of you that just wants to die because it just cannot reconcile the differences within themselves. So, I can no longer do this thing and I can't go back. And there is just nothing I can do. And what we do is to work with that part to help it transform itself and liberate itself from whatever burden is carrying and see how it can, live within the system of being a full person. And then the other scenario is that there is a part or parts which are so depressed, so sad, and suffering so much that then another part or parts, they would just say, it's okay, we can end this. You can end this in your own terms. If it's that bad, you can end this. There is always a way out. Even if this is not the best way out, it's probably quite harsh. There's a lack of creativity, but that's typical from depression, lack of creativity. But if that's how you feel, if you really feel that bad and you really believe there is no way to change things for you, then yes, we always have this option. So it's a very kind part, a very caring part that comes and offers that possibility to a person who is feeling very, very sad.
Mm. Yeah. 'Cause basically that's what happened to me, and your response was like, so, 'cause there's a lot of shame around it, I guess. It's like scary to admit that, or you think suddenly you're going to be put in like a straitjacket or something. But you were just like, that's a part. Like, let's talk to that part. And it's like, what? Like, it's that simple. And that's like that has been the most transformative thing for me. Like, and that was after 3+ years of like dealing with depression. So that's why I'm just like, this is so groundbreaking and people need to know about it. But I feel like we haven't explained, because people might be like, what the hell is a part? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So how did you go from CBT to then learn about this whole model?
I felt there was something wrong and I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't feel comfortable with the idea that I would be sitting here telling people that they should think differently so they would feel better. I never enjoyed that. And I had this feeling there is something more to this. And I didn't know what it was. And I've just watched lectures. I researched. I tried to find everything I could to enlighten me. And from when I was 19, I started reading Jung. Possibly too challenging for a 19-year-old, I would say. And as much as I tried, I didn't really grasp it. But what I did grasp was the idea of the archetypes, an archetype constellation being when you act out, that being the work of an archetypal pattern. And then, because it feels like, why did I say that? Why did I do that? And that being an archetype. And then him saying, if you look at the Greek myths, they are all archetypes. So some Western patterns of thought and behavior can be traced to Greek mythology, and you can then work with that. If you look at the myths, the stories, you can help those constellations healing, because they're looking for some sort of resolution. So I thought, okay, well, that's very interesting. But how do I apply this? How do I apply this in a therapeutic environment? And to become a Jungian analyst takes something like 10 years.
Who is Jung, for people who don't know?
Carl Gustav Jung, he was a doctor, a Swiss doctor. He was born in 1880, maybe. And he was an alumni of Freud. And he broke out with Freud because he wanted to be an archaeologist, and he managed to get himself traveling. And he went to Africa. He went to America to visit the Native American tribes. He visited Greece, and he learned about he was really interested in history, culture, and religion. And his father he's not a priest, is the thing that he was Protestant, it's not priest. I'm sorry about this, I can't remember the word. But his father was the head of church, and they talked about religion a lot. So he was very religious and very curious. And he found Freud's approach really interesting. And at first he was completely absorbed by it. But upon his travels, he realized there are patterns of existence everywhere which are similar across cultures that have never met. So he thought, well, then that means we must have some patterns of existence within ourselves. And one big one is belief in God. Every tribe he went believed in God or gods. And there's no tribe he's ever visited that had no belief in God. And so he started from that, and then he found many similarities and started mapping them and came up with, he believed in God, and he said he knew it existed. And he started doing this work that sounded very mystic, and he brought in concepts from other philosophies, including Indian philosophy. So he incorporated the idea of self as the Atman, as the soul. And Freud didn't like that at all. Freud was very scientific. He didn't really believe in anything. He wanted to keep it very medically oriented. Those are diseases of the mind, but you can cure them by talking. You can resolve them, which was a significant breakthrough. People say, oh, Freud did some damage. That is ill-informed. Freud is the reason why we don't just lock people up when they're ill. Before Freud, if you were considered insane, you'd be just locked up. There was no conversation. And, in Nazi German, you'd be euthanized if you had anything like that. So Freud did a lot of contribution to say we can help those illnesses. They're curable, or they're treatable.
And he's known as the father of psychotherapy.
Yes, and absolutely that's correct. He is, at least in Western terms. And Jung came in with a more humanistic approach. He says, no, there is God, there is a soul, we all have a soul, we all have a reason to exist, and we are all searching for it, and we will find it. And he called this the process of individuation. And we're all seeking the same thing, which is self-actualization. And he ended up having to break up with Freud and went into deep depression for many years. Wrote many books, which are very difficult to read because he kind of wrote for himself. He almost didn't really care about presentation. And then he started that school of thought. In the 1950s, Carl Rogers, another prominent psychologist, based on these ideas and any other ideas, I don't know, he doesn't say exactly where his ideas came from, but I have my guesses. He went for he simplified things, because he said everyone has this self. He called it the organismic self, and you can call it the soul, you can call it the Atman, you can call it, the self. For Carl Rogers, it was the organismic self. And it's something in you that knows what you need. It knows who you are. It is who you truly are. And it needs to express itself. And it has a self-expression which is constructive and wants to do something constructive. Whatever that is. And then we have the idealized self, which is the person whom we think we want to be because of our culture. Those are introjected values from your family, from your culture, from people around you, from your tribe. You know, what is it to be a good tribe member? And then we have the self-concept, which is who we think we are. It's that evaluation of who am I now? So, and then he said, psychological suffering arises when those three are incongruent, when they're not aligned. I am striving for something that I cannot be and never will be. I know that I cannot be. And I see myself as being a second-class citizen because I cannot be that thing I want to be.
Okay, so that's the classic example of people like, I feel the pressure to have this type of job and get a house and get married at this time, and I am just gonna quit everything and go to South America for a year because it's like too much.
Yes, exactly. And we know it's not right. We know it. But we try to adapt because adaptation is essential for survival. But it could be that the way you were brought up and your parents were brought up and the people around you, and also your own evaluation of your environment, because we can have so many different traits that is always is like a lottery. And you can get to the conclusion that you are completely unsuitable because you cannot be what your society wants, what you think you have to be, which has been introjected. It could be true, it could not be true, actually. But that's how you understand it to be. And you know that you will not be able to do it. And then you feel like, well, what's the point? I shouldn't be alive. So it's a conclusion that is easy to get to if you're not in contact and you don't have someone supporting you to say it's okay, you know. If you don't want to have children, you don't have to have children. If you don't want to buy a house, you don't have to buy a house.
Yeah, that's so interesting about that whole idea about it. It's not necessarily true. Because I had that with my parents. It was so funny that I just felt like there were certain expectations on me when actually there weren't. And I remember, like, it was only a couple of years ago, like, crying to them, being like, I feel like I can't be myself because you wouldn't accept me. They were like, what do you mean? I was like, what if I became a Buddhist? Like, you would disown me. They were like, what are you talking about? Like, feel free to become a Buddhist. And I was like, what? Really? It's just like this made up thing. I mean, in some cases, like for some people it might be very real that they would be disowned if they...
Yes, and then I also would add that people change. Your parents' perspective will have changed in 20 years. So it could be that when you introjected this idea, it was true. But now it's no longer true. So it just needs updating. We need a lot of updating as well because we record information, emotional information even more. So we record emotional information and it's very vivid. But the world and the people around us will change. They will have moved on, but we will still keep that. So like you're saying, possibly when you were a child or a teenager, that possibly was true. They might have been thinking, I want Delia to work hard and be a banker. And there is no other option. It could be. Now they're more mellow. They're more open.
Yeah, I don't think they ever thought that, luckily.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. No, I think the common thing is like when you're judged for like with a friend, like they laugh at you about something that's like weird or you want to try something and they laugh, but then they see other people doing it. And then later they're like, oh yeah, that's normal. And it's like, what? Like, you judged me and I've never forgot that moment that you laughed at me. And now you're acting like it's a normal thing that everyone does. But yeah, it's obviously they were uncomfortable with it, so they judged and then they changed or something like that.
Yeah, people change. But because I wanted to add that when that happens, it's easy for us to feel, oh my God, I've just gone crazy. But it isn't. There was a reason why that belief was there in the first place. Our minds are sharper than we even realize. So there was something, picked up something that was true. It's not true anymore. But there's never like out of nowhere. Never really. There's always a reason. We're very good at picking up cues from the environment.
Okay, so where did you go? So you saw to become a Jungian,
yeah,
it would take 10 years.
Yeah, or more. A friend of mine took 12. So, and also, there was another problem with Jung, because I've been studying him and his work and the people post-Jungians, and I thought, wow, this is all very interesting and it's fascinating. It's a really enlightening universe, but what do I do with this? What will I actually do to help somebody? How does that help? Just telling them to go and read Greek mythology is not really how it works, I don't think. So, so I then, one day I was sitting in this office and I had no clients, and it was a Friday, and I'll never forget. I received an email from PSS UK, which is an educational institution online. And they said, we have this free day-long workshop with Alexia Rothman, an IFS therapist, and she will teach you how to work with parts and heal trauma. I thought, well, that sounds like a good thing to do with my time. So I logged in and I started watching.
And you'd never heard of it?
No, and had never heard of it. And I started watching, and she talked first about burdens. She started saying, we carry those burdens. And she says, shame, guilt, suicidal thoughts, those heavy burdens that we carry, but it's not as a whole that we have parts that carry those burdens. And the part feels unsuitable. The part that feels shame, for example, feels that it's not good. Shame is, I am bad. And she says, the part that feels that is just a part. We've got other parts, and we've got the self that can help this part. And I'm going to show you how that will work. And did the demonstration. And instantly, I synchronized with it. I watched that and I thought, yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Because that brings everything together. It brings all the schools of thought together in a way that we can actually use with somebody, and it takes no time at all. You deconstruct the sense of self. So we walk around thinking we are one. And that if we feel shame, we are bad, the whole of us. And if you feel guilt, you did something bad, the whole of you. And, and that mono-mindedness leads to despair. When you split yourself into different parts, and she demonstrated it naturally happening with people who were skeptical, you see a very different picture. You see, oh, I see. So there's a part of me that feels shame, and it's carrying that shame from that thing that happened that day. But there are other parts that are there who don't carry that burden, and they come and go, and they can advise. And then when those parts are separate, you access self-energy, because the self-energy is your pure consciousness. So when you talk to those parts and you see them separate from yourself, you see them from your true self. it's still possible that you see yourself from another part, but more likely you will get a much greater idea of who you truly are because you know those parts. And that's liberating. And that was a game changer for me. And I decided I wanted to work from that paradigm. So how did they arrive to that conclusion? What school of thought supports that? What came before them? Because Jung is quite a clear one, since he said we have a self. But what he called the parts, I think that's what he called the constellations of archetypes. Those are the parts. And in yoga, we call the different bodies, and there is one of the bodies which is the knowledge body, and there is the mind body and the intuition body, and so they do have a concept of us being made of different parts, but it's not the same. I'd say like our psychological parts are one of the bodies in yoga, in my mind, and they applying that. So the genius of IFS is applying family theory to those parts by resolving conflict. So a lot of suffering comes from internal conflict when I want to do something but I don't want to do something at the same time. So Carl Rogers would say, well, you've got the ideal self, but you've got who you actually are. Those things are not aligned. You can't move forward. And in this case, this paradigm is, well, get the part that wants to do this. Get the part that doesn't want to do this. Separate from them and see where that goes. Look at the parts that support one. Look at the parts that resent and ask them to move away from this so you can devote your resources to those parts that need your attention. And that really works. You know, we have limited psychic energy. So you cannot have all parts in equal strength all the time. So you've got to give psychic energy to one part or other part or the self. You can't have them all at the same time. And by doing that, you get a lot of clarity, because this problem now is just between you as your consciousness and those two parts that don't agree with each other. And IFS also show that those parts want the same thing, which is for you to be well and happy and self-actualize. They just have different ideas of what is and isn't acceptable. So resolving those, like you resolve a family crisis. You know, in a family, everyone has to live together. They all love each other, you know, but things happen. And he applies those techniques of conflict resolution within your own internal system, and it works.
So that's why it's called internal family systems.
Yes.
Which people get very confused by the name, and they're like, does this mean I'm going to be doing therapy like with my family? It's like, no.
Yes, it's your internal family. Yeah.
And I guess the idea is familiar to anyone, because everyone's experienced that thing where it's like, a part of me wants to do this, part of, you know, making a decision, or you're torn. It's like, should I go for a drink tonight? Like, part of you saying like, no, we said we were going to be healthier or something. And then part of you, or even, yeah, I'm reading Shoe Dog, Phil Knight's autobiography, and he's talking about like going to Japan to eventually start Nike, and like this voice in his head saying, go home, this is stupid, but another voice saying, do it. So it's like this idea of, for everyone, yeah, we all have these voices coming to us. Yeah. But it's not, like, that's why I love this model, because it applies to everyone. It's not about like, oh, there's something wrong with you, you're sick or like faulty and we have to fix you. And people who don't do therapy are just like these healthy, you know, people. It's like, no, we're all designed like this.
Yes, exactly. The idea of fixing is another one, which CBT is pretty much about fixing, and humanistic approaches are not. And if you're trying to fix somebody, in the consulting room, if you feel the urge to help them, then you should step back. Because that's you trying to change them. And why are you trying to change them? Because it feels uncomfortable. And why does it feel uncomfortable? That's my process. So if I'm in the therapy room wanting to help somebody, that means I'm uncomfortable with whom they are right now. And that does the opposite of helping.
Interesting.
Because that means you're sick, or you're not well, or let's get rid of this discomfort quickly. When the path to healing is the opposite, is to say, okay, how you feel is completely acceptable.
And then what happens?
When you feel accepted, and you, by that I mean everything in you. So parts is a word chosen because we already use it the way you've described. However, it doesn't really does justice. They are entities. And in focusing, for example, you call something in you. We don't have a name for it. It's impossible to describe. But this thing in you, this something in you, is unique. And is different from the other somethings in you. And is different from your pure consciousness. So we use it parts, but it's not really just that. I forgot what I was going with this now.
So what happens when the parts feel accepted?
That's right. So there is a very big difference between schools of thought now when it comes to the healing process. And my favorite approach is Eugene Gendlin's approach. And it's that when this part of you, this something in you that feels very uncomfortable, feels shame, feels inadequate, feels everything, that allowing it to just be, allowing to feel how it feels and to let you know how it feels. And better still, to let someone else know. So having a witness. That in itself allows for this something to be healed. The witnessing is done by the self. So if you can hold your consciousness, the self energy, this pure consciousness, and experience this something in you, from your consciousness, it will heal. But if you don't, it won't. So if another part is witnessing it, it's judging it. If me as a therapist have a part of me or parts of me witnessing it, it's judging it. And for as long as it's being judged, it won't have the space to heal. Maybe you will, but it's unlikely. Because what we think, and what I think, and what other people think, is that this witnessing needs to be done by this genuinely compassionate, all-accepting, all-loving consciousness that we have. Then that will, the part or the something in you feels like, actually it's okay, I'm fine. I feel bad, but I'm okay. I can exist. I'm allowed to exist. And I'm loved just by existing. I don't have to please anyone. I don't have to be something I'm not. That in itself allows this to heal. And this healing happens there and then.
So what's an example of what would happen, someone coming in to a session with you?
Okay, well, highly hypothetical because every person is a universe. It's impossible to predict what's going to happen. But what would normally happen... Just gonna drink a sip of water. In overly simplified terms. What will normally happen is that you'll come in and say, I don't know what to do. Okay, well, let's look at that. So part of me wants to go on a date with this guy or girl. And, you know, we really fancy them. And they're very attractive. And they've asked us on a date, so, you know, but another part of me thinks I can't date this person because they will find out that I'm not good. They will be disappointed in me. So I'm not gonna go. What should I do? And, well, then I will say, okay, let's talk about this. You know, would it be okay if I use a language with you that will enable us to separate yourself from those parts of you that are in conflict? And that will help you gain some clarity, as opposed to being in the middle of this conflict. You can be a little bit detached from it. Hopefully the person will say yes. If say no, it's a different story. They could say no. It would be different. But let's say they say yes. Then I'll say, so there's something in you that is very afraid of what this person will find out about you. The answer will probably say yes. Okay. And what does this something in you think will happen? And then it will be something to do with shame, right? So there is something in me that feels a lot of shame. Okay. So would it be okay for us to reach out to that something in you that feels shame? Or I might be a bit more abstract and say, how does that feel in your body? How does that shame feel in your body, you know? Oh, it feels tight on my chest. Are you okay with that? Because as soon as you ask the person to look at those different conflicting somethings in them, that already increases self-energy. It already shifts your attention from being one to being multiple. And when you're multiple, things are very different. And then you start seeing, oh, I see. Then that's something in me still is carrying that belief because of something that someone said in the past. Oh, I see. So someone made you feel like that. Yes. Okay. And how do you feel towards this part of you that has been suffered this abuse or shaming? I feel compassion. I would like to help it. And then from that on, it just naturally happens, you know. Just naturally, the person goes into a mode where they can see themselves with more compassion, more understanding, and get more clarity. It's quite a natural process. Depending on where the person is as well. Some people can see images more, some people can feel more, some people don't feel anything. So you go you read, you know, the person and ask, and are you okay to do that? And if they're not, we try something different, you know. If the person feels safe with you, okay, that's the main thing. For me as a therapist, to be the best I can be with a client, I can't have any parts trying to do the work. No parts can try to be a hero. The parts, they need to step back. And my job is just to witness somebody and help them witness themselves. So it will all be around, how does that feel? Are you okay to proceed? Can you see yourself separate, or does it still feel, you know, that it's you? And if it still feels that it's you, then we've got some work to do to help the person separate from that feeling. Sometimes they can't. Okay, well, then just really feel it. If it's okay with you, just really let it happen. And the person knows that this is good for them because they feel safe with you. If they don't feel safe with you, then there won't be a lot of progress, because you will just be sitting there like you are with everyone else in your daily life. Most people you probably don't trust because you've been judged. So if a person doesn't feel safe with me, it's Probably because there is a part of me in the room still. Or there could be other reasons. But likely it will be because there is a part of me in the room, I believe. And then it's work on my side to make that happen. And sometimes it won't, sometimes parts of me won't step out. We can't really help it. It can't be in self-energy all the time at will. That'll be kind of a monk sort of skill. It tends to work. Parts tend to be kind and separate. But if there is, it's about transference and counter-transference, I guess, which is very complex to explain. But if there is an element of a transfer going on, which is some sort of dynamic that is unresolved, then my parts might not be able to step out.
As in, if something's being triggered, like to do with what happened to you in your childhood or something like
yes,
that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so on that, I need to ask you about growing up, which was that was supposed to be like a 5-minute question, but we've nearly run out of time. So how did you grow up?
Although I was born in São Paulo, I grew up in the countryside in a very little town of 100,000 inhabitants, but this town was quite isolated with a lot of farmland around. And Brazil, when you talk about farmland, you're talking hectares and hectares. So very isolated. There was nothing going on. There was one cinema, which never really showed any movies. And a lot of my time was spent with my cousins and my friends playing outside or reading books. And most of my time was reading books, probably too advanced for my age at any point. My mother never restricted us. She never said, oh no, you shouldn't read that or you shouldn't watch that. She always let us do whatever we wanted, which that was quite good because I accessed quite a lot of things. I was reading about we had a membership from a library, which was a really big library, and my mom also liked reading, so we would go there every week and get new books and exchange the books. And I read about the Wiccas when I was about 12. I read Jung when I was about 12 for the first time. I read Sartre. I really, really read a lot of stuff that it was highly unsuitable for my age. Which a lot of it didn't make sense at the time, but a lot of it did catch my imagination. And I thought that was quite important, to have that opportunity, And now I think children shouldn't be restricted. I think they can make sense of the world in their own way, and that's all right. Yeah, but then of course, in being in the countryside, it involves a lot of domestic violence. So there was a lot of domestic violence in my household. My mom, I had a stepfather, and I have a brother and a sister, and we saw a lot of violence. We were beaten a lot as well. So there was a lot of trauma from that.
By your stepfather?
By my stepfather, by my mother. I think my mother had my mother passed away, so she had some sort of neurological disorder, and she was very irritable, and very gratuitously violent. So now, learning everything, reading about attachment styles, I realized that I lived in fear. We lived in fear. I never knew what to say, how that was going to be met. And there was never an explanation like, oh, if you do this that way, I'll be upset. Or if you say that, you upset your father or your mother. Or, there was never an explanation. It was just kind of a beating if you said the wrong thing. Or if you drop something by accident, there would probably be a beating as well, which never made any sense. And I just always thought there was something wrong with me. So it took me a long time to understand that my mother had some sort of issue, that it wasn't normal the way she behaved. And it took me a lot of time to understand that I had difficulty reading people. I never thought, oh, that's what this person is thinking. I never thought that. I've always lived in my own head. Only now that I'm starting to understand how we all work. But for most of my life, I was kind of a bit autistic. You know, I didn't know what people were thinking, what drives them, or I had no idea. I just based my decisions on my own view, my own world. And I didn't know that was lacking until someone showed it to me in an attachment workshop. You know, that was kind of, oh yeah, that makes sense. That explains it.
Huh. How does it connect with attachment?
So if you have a parent like my mother and my stepdad, and they just beat you up, no reasoning for it, then you live in fear. And you fear because you don't know what people are thinking, because that process has never been introduced to you in one, and that makes you very anxious because you don't know what the other person's thinking.
You're like hypervigilant.
Yes.
So then does it mean you're avoidant?
You could be avoidant. Then again, there is your own individual element. So you could be anxious avoidant, or you could just be anxious attached. I think I was anxious attached. So I will engage in the relationship. I will have a lot of hope because in a sense, my mother was very warm and loving when she was. And so that was the element of having a lot of love to give, a lot of warmth, and kind of hoping for the best, but always be waiting for the moment when the person will turn, or for me to say something wrong and they will be upset and I will never know what that will be because I have no idea what people think. So I've lived in agony for years without really understanding what was happening.
Huh. Oh my god, attachment theory is a whole nother topic as well.
Yes.
I have so many more questions, but you are hosting a workshop that we have to go to, which is why we're ending now. So I'll just ask you the last 3 questions, unless there's anything else you want to say before you wrap up.
No, anything I say will probably take another hour.
Okay. How do you stay grounded?
Meditating, if I can. Specifically, bringing attention to my breath, to my body, to the weight of my body on the chair, and seeing things in the room. And I found that was one of the first CBT techniques, actually, is to look for 5 things you can see, 5 things you can feel, 5 things you can hear. And that brings you right back into the present. That's really good. When you start, hyperventilating, that is a good thing to do. Lately, I've learned to do 3 ohms with my hands on my ears. And that somehow also kind of stops any patterns that you get into when you start working yourself up. That helps. Yeah, that.
So you just kind of do it as and when you find you need it?
Yeah, kind of.
Is there a book that stands out as having had the biggest impact on you?
I am going to go for Jung. Memories, Dreams, Reflections. I was too young to read it, but I've read it several times now. Every time you read it differently. And that really did make me think of the world as a world of possibilities in a strange way. It took me away from where I grew up. So, yeah.
And what 3 words describe the best version of you?
Oh, God. okay, the best version of me, I guess, would be I'm not allowed to make value judgments. I know it's just a podcast, but I'm just kind of, if I say best version of me, I will be not fair to the other versions of me.
I was gonna say, you could just use your favorite words of the self.
I thought of that exactly, but then I think myself said, but then I'm not better than anyone else. I'm not better than all the other parts. It's just, the best version of myself will be whatever needs to be at the appropriate time. So there you go. There you go. So, every different time calls for a different version.
Okay, that's the best possible therapist, psychologist answer you can have on this podcast.
At least it's genuine. I can't see. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for this.